I just didn't know where to start with this story, so I may jump back and forth. You never know. But before I start my story, I thought you might like to see what's behind me. I need to step aside so you can see it better. See this cabinet? It's an oak cabinet. It's the top half of a old kitchen Hoosier cabinet, as you can see. I bought that from a lady for, no, I didn't pay for that. I traded her a room-sized piece of carpet for this cabinet. The cabinet was covered with white milk paint. If you've ever done any painting, you know what white milk paint is. Goes way back. So I had it refinished. And you can see, I don't know if you can see I'm sitting on my little kitchen chair, so I'm liable to fall all over the place. I don't know if you can see the design on the glass. It's kind of hard to see. I've got a Country Decorator magazine that shows this same cabinet on the front cover. Not my cabinet, but one just like it. Now below the cabinet, the bottom half, you're only seeing the top of it. It's tabletop. And this is what they call a sow belly cabinet. It's just the bottom half. So you know the sow belly. See if I can pull this forward a little. And you might be able to see, well, there's one drawer right there. Where is my finger pointing? Oh, you can't tell. Anyway, there's one of the drawers, and the drawers curve. They're deep drawers. So I thought you might want to see those. Okay, it's made of maple. So I put the two together and I had me a combination kitchen cabinet. Wouldn't take anything for these two pieces of furniture. On top, you can see my ironstone crockery, I'll call it. All of my bowls. Over here is see more bowls. Can you see them? Yeah. Right here, more bowls. Behind that is my mother's milk pitcher. You've seen that before, so you don't really need a good view of it. But I do love all of my big mixing bowls. They're stacked. There's 4 here, and there's 4 over here. Now, this little one has the pink and blue stripes on it, and another one has the pink and blue stripes that matches it. And these you'll find many times. And on the bottom of this little bowl it says $6. I'm telling you, you wouldn't have bought this bowl for $6. These things were expensive, very expensive when I was buying them. And of course this one is your Shawnee corn pattern. Now I'd love to have a whole set of that. But as you can see on this one, the second bowl up, it's got a green edging. It's really pretty. And let's see. Here's what you're talking about. See the pattern? You can see the edging around the bowl. Okay. Yeah. These little designs. This has got a matching piece right below it. The green, and then here's one with the lip. And over to the other side, let's see if I show it. You can't see it very well. But over here I have one of these bowls. The one on the bottom is a Fiesta. I guess it's called a mixing bowl. I don't know what it's called. But Jan found it for me years ago in an estate sale. And I've never seen another one like it. So that just gives you a little idea of what I've got decorating. You can see a little bit on top of my cabinet. I like the chickens. Can you see the chickens? Yeah, here's one of them, another one over here. And then there's one over here behind me. I'll pick it up so you can see it. See this little chicken? I'll set him right, or her right out here where you can get a good look at her. Anyway, this is one wall of things that I've collected. And I like the old country look. It's just sort of homey, pleasing. So, this is one section of the wall. You can see over this shoulder that great big print that I redid to give it the old master original look. And beside it is rhinestone jewelry under glass that I did. I've never liked it too much, I think because I don't have enough color in it. But it's put together and it'll keep for a while till I come up with something new to replace it with. Okay, what I want to talk about now I've talked about before. But I've noticed that so many of you love to hear the stories about grandparents and great-grandparents. Well, you know, I never had any grandparents. The only grandparent in my family was my mother. She was old enough to be my grandmother, but she was my mother. She was 39 years old when I was born. But she has told me stories about her grandmother. Her grandmother was Sarah Campbell Carmack Brooks, all those four names. Sarah was called Sally. Carmack was my grandfather, great-grandfather, and my grandmother was Amanda, their daughter. Okay, gotta give you the little bit of the history, you know, let you know where we are in the family history. Sarah was a young bride at the beginning of the Civil War. Enoch was taken away. He was gone. She had two children, a little boy named Abraham, they called him Abram, and a little girl who was just a toddler named Amanda. She was my grandmother. What was she going to do? She didn't know where Enoch was. She had no idea where he was. But to my knowledge, he was somewhere in Mississippi fighting with the Confederacy. Now, he was not happy because he deserted twice. I've seen the paperwork showing where he deserted, and they caught him and took him back. But in the long run, we don't know what happened to Enoch. We think he escaped and went north and probably died of dysentery or something because all of the soldiers were sick, very sick. a lot of them died of dysentery and diseases, and we think he was one of them. Okay, here's Sally in the little log cabin. It's her and the 2 children. She's trying her best to survive, and she's watching daily for the enemy soldiers to come across the hills, up through the valleys. And she was on a hillside where she could see a good distance, but she had no one there with her. Enemy soldiers came. They came in her house, and they start searching. They're always searching for valuables. You're not going to find valuables in a country farmhouse. No, you find the bare necessities. There's no money. There's no jewels. There's nothing to take unless you take their food. Now, she had hidden a small piece of bacon in little Amanda's cradle. It was a handmade cradle, you know the type, the little wooden cradle. And under the little handmade quilt and blanket that her doll laid on was that piece of bacon. The soldiers didn't bother the children's toys. Neither did they find the cellar, which was under a big braided rug in the middle of the floor. The opening was, so they didn't try moving the rug to see if anything was under it. That was safe. But one soldier walked over, and there was the meat box. He opened it up. Another piece of meat. And this is all the food she had. He picked it up. He started toward the door. Amanda was hanging on to her mother's dress for dear life, shaking. She was scared. Sally looked at that young soldier, and she said, "Go ahead, take it. It's all we have left. You take it. And I hope when you go to sleep at night, you hear the cries of these young children, the hungry children." The young soldier turned around, walked back over to the meat box, lifted the lid, put the meat back in, and walked out the door. That's how it was for Sally. Now, time passed. She had decided Enoch was dead. She couldn't get by on her own. And she remarried. She married a man named John Brooks. My thinking is, I've never been shown any proof of this, but my thinking is he had 8 children already. And I'm just assuming his wife probably died in childbirth with the 8th child. So he and Sally married. Now, it's kind of funny the way I got this information. I had gone home one weekend and I said, "Now, Mama, I'm working on the family history. I need a lot of information. You're the only person that can tell me. And the first thing I want to know is," now, like I told you, great-grandma Brooks had married John Brooks. So I said, "How many children did Grandma Brooks have?" She said, well, there was 20 in all. There was Nathan and there was William and I said, wait a minute, Mama. I need to write this down. I can't remember all of this. I said, to tell you what I'm going to do next time I come, I'm going to bring a tape recorder and you can give me the information. She was able to name all 20 children. There was Sally's 2, John's 8, and they had, 10 more. 10 more children between them. 20 children. Now, I find Grandma Brooks a very interesting lady. Of course, she had the cabin, and John Brooks must have been fairly well-to-do because there was property. And as far as I know, when my grandmother Amanda married William Floyd Rowlett, they moved into the cabin that belonged to Grandma Brooks. Grandma Brooks by then was widowed and she lived with them. My grandfather, he added rooms onto the house. There was a dog trot, and where the mill rooms were, that was turned into a separate section for Grandma Brooks to live in, and he added bedrooms upstairs for the girls, my mother and her 2 sisters. Others had married. So the 3 girls, slept in one bed in the upstairs bedroom. Grandpa Rowlett was quite the handyman. He was a blacksmith. He was a farmer, 200 or 300 acres of farmland. He ran a general store. So, in our way of thinking, they were doing pretty well. But in their way of thinking, no, it took the whole family all working on the farm to keep the household going and food on the table. So Grandpa would tell my mother and her sisters and her brothers stories about the Civil War. Oh, he had all kinds of stories to tell about his uncles. One of his uncles was killed at Pennsylvania. You know where I'm talking about. He was killed there. Another one was a pilot for the Union Army, and he led families through the Gap. The Gap was Cumberland Gap. There was a very narrow wooded passage area that they had to walk through single file, and they had to go through at night because the enemy soldiers would find them. And so this uncle took the family through Cumberland Gap into Kentucky to other family members' homes for safety. That's just a little bit of Civil War history for you. But the main story that sticks in my mind and it fascinates me. And I'm going to tell you why. How many of you have seen Meet Me in St. Louis, Meet Me at the Fair with Judy Garland? Oh, I'll bet I've seen it 6 or 8 times. one of the best movies ever. That movie was made based on the 1904 World's Fair. Now, Grandma Brooks' oldest son to John Brooks, worked for the railroad, and he worked in St. Louis, Missouri. He would send passes to Grandma. She could come and visit him on the train. It didn't cost anything. Well, what do you know? The World's Fair is coming to St. Louis. Her son said, I'm sending you passes. You can come and visit me. We'll go to the World's Fair. Now I want to read a little bit to you. Part of the story. If I can, I'm going to use flashlight because the lighting is a little dark over here and I can't see good anyway. Okay, I want to read this to you. She reached up with one hand to push her wire-rimmed glasses a little higher on her nose, then took a long puff from her new clay pipe. Grandma was continually breaking her pipes, so George would send her new one from St. Louis. The girls smiled, broadened after as she began setting the scene. The girls were my mother, my Aunt Renee, and my Aunt Cassie. They giggled when she told about leaving the train in St. Louis with her tapestry suitcase, calling it a soup case. Crowds of people from everywhere were at the station. They, too, had come to the fair. Shuffling along the thoroughfare at the expansive exposition was like nothing she had ever experienced before. People had arrived from European countries, speaking foreign languages, and she could not understand anything they said. She told the girls about their unusual style of dress and described the bright, colorful costumes worn by the performers and musical entertainers. To her young granddaughters, the most exciting scene was the exhibit displaying the goose that laid the golden egg. They were awestruck when she lifted her arm to form a circle to better portray the size of the brilliant golden egg. I'm skipping a little bit here. The Columbian Exposition had again presented the Ferris wheel, which was first erected at the Chicago World's Fair in 1893. It carried nearly 2 million people at the Chicago Fair. Even the fair held in Paris, France in 1900 could not top the 1904 exposition. The Ferris wheel was 264 feet high. Use your imagination, folks. Picture that, 264 feet high. And it had 36 cars with a capacity of 60 persons per car. You've been on a Ferris wheel before. You know the size of them. Imagine this one. 2 revolutions took from 20 to 30 minutes. They were allowed for each passenger. As the mighty wheel rolled each car higher and higher, a grand panorama unfolded with an expanse of nearly 50 miles. One could get a far better view of the illuminated grounds with the lagoons, the gondolas, the pike, and all the movement of happy throngs reflected from the lights. I had not seen nor ear heard of a more striking spectacle than the night view of the Grand St. Louis Exposition from the top of the Ferris wheel. Now, what I'm going to show you next, I was in an antique shop in Lake City, Tennessee, browsing, just looking, and there laid a brochure. I picked it up. What do you think it said? The St. Louis World's Fair, 1904. A brochure, an original one. Now I'm going to try to show you a little picture. It's been copied from that brochure that I have. This picture is the Ferris wheel I just told you about. 264 feet high. And I've already given you a description of that Ferris wheel. Now this was my great-grandmother. Oh, there was another thing I wanted to read to you as well. Let's see if I can find it. I'm pulling up the wrong one, I think. Okay. Well, I can't seem to spot it, but what I wanted to tell you about, and this has always been a question in my mind. John Philip Sousa, you all know that name. You all know that he wrote and composed Stars and Stripes Forever. How many times have you heard that played by a band? John Philip Sousa was at the World's Fair leading the band. And I've always wondered if my great-grandmother was there to see John Philip Sousa. Now, wouldn't that be fascinating to know that you had a grandparent that saw someone that famous? He was famous then, and he's still famous. So I've always thought, I wonder if Grandma Brooke got to see John Philip Sousa, and if he had any impact on her whatsoever, other than just being a band leader, leading the marching band at the World's Fair. Now that's just my great-grandmother's story. None of them were famous for anything special. They were farmers. They raised a lot of kids, and they fought in the Civil War. There were some who fought in the Revolutionary War, but I don't know much about them. I don't have stories to tell about them. But my grandfather was telling my mother and her sisters and brothers the trials, the tribulation, the dangers during the Civil War, because he was a 5-year-old child sitting up on a stone gate. He had been placed up on that stone gate, and he was told to keep his eyes open and to never look away from the land down below, because that's where the enemy soldiers would be coming. And they were in the gardens plowing and planting, trying to provide food for their families. And they knew if the enemy soldiers caught them, of course, they would be taken away to prison. So my grandfather would tell my mother, and she said they would sit right at his feet in their little flannel nightgowns and pajamas, and they would get closer and closer. The light from the big fireplace that he had built, they could see the shadows on the wall of Grandpa motions when he was telling about sitting on that big gate post, and he would see the soldiers coming, and he would jump down from that post, and he would run for all he was worth, yelling and yelling, "The soldiers are coming, the soldiers are coming." And my grandfather's parents, his uncles, they all hid in the woods until the enemy soldiers passed on through. That's just a little story, but it's a family story, and it's history. And our young people need to know this history. They need to know all they can learn from their own family history. And I'm suggesting to the mothers and the grandmothers and the grandfathers, set those young ones down and tell them about your history. They won't be sorry they learned it, and they will grow up telling the same stories to their children. See, I've told you before that I'm of the generation, the World War II generation, because I can remember it. I can remember the things that happened in my own family. My brother that was killed. I can remember, I was just 7 years old. I can remember walking up the street with my mother, and we were just 11 miles from Oak Ridge, Tennessee, where the Manhattan Project was taking place. And the fear of the atom bomb was in every home. But I remember walking up the street to town. Town was just about 3 or 4 blocks away. And of course you walked because you didn't have access to transportation. There were no ration stamps for gasoline and the tires. And so wherever you went, you walked. So we walked up the street. And what I remember most is, it's hard to tell, the gold star hanging in the windows. You know what that meant. I don't ever remember seeing the gold star hanging in our window. I don't think my mother could take it. So, tell your children their stories. You had parents and grandparents that went through World War II and Vietnam War. Write these things down. Get them on your iPads and look for reports and things in your family history. Leave those things for your children. You don't want your heritage to be forgotten. You don't want it to appear that you never existed, that your parents never existed, because you didn't keep the information, you didn't write it down, you didn't put it on record. I can't emphasize that enough. I just wish I had someone I could go to, but you see, my mother was the last person I could go to. And of course I was a grandmother by then, but Mama was still living, and Mama could tell me so much about what life was like and the stories she had been told from her own grandmother, the one who got to go to the St. Louis World's Fair. Now, the next time you watch that movie, and I'm sure it'll be on Turner Classic Movies soon, it's on ever so often, and I can't help but watch it. For one thing, I like Margaret O'Brien. She was the little girl, and I love Judy Garland. She was a wonderful actress. And Meet Me in St. Louis is based on history. Even though it's a musical, it is based on the real 1904 World Fair. So that's all I'm going to tell you now. And I know I've told part of it before, but you tell this story to your children. You tell it to your grandchildren. They need to know it. So, thank you for watching.